I was Team LeBron until about 2 years ago. I mean, I'm still Team LeBron, still my favorite player today in today's NBA, but in that comparison, I feel it's no comparison in terms of level of greatness. Right?
Greatness, yeah. I mean, greatness is. I mean, how do you describe it, right? That's the definition. That's the question is how you describe greatness between those two players, and that's what we're trying to figure out, right?
That's right.
So
that's
we're recording, so you guys can. So I watched the last two episodes last night, and it was interesting to see how the media switched on him in a second. You know what I mean? Because that wasn't my era. So for me, like I'm 33. My era was late Jordan. It wasn't early Jordan. And that early Jordan era, like I don't really know him too much. That's why I'm more of a LeBron guy. I think that you can't compare basketball eras, right? It's tough. But to see how the media switched on him so quickly was interesting.
Yeah.
I think MJ said it really well, though. Like, I can't remember what the exact quote was, but he said, if I could do it all over again, I would never set myself up as a role model. He probably liked the cash from Gatorade and whatnot, but the want to be like Mike thing, and Space Jam and all those things, it really did set him up as this kind of ideal human being, which he was pretty damn close, incredible. But then there was
also
that
in the
too,
90s. Yeah, and this was the 90s, right? So like a phenomenon like MJ, like we'd never seen that before, right? So national television broadcasts, global audiences, everything sort of blowing up at the same time. This crazy sponsorship deal with Nike, becoming a Hollywood star at the same time. So the media was kind of this was an object, a hero that they'd never seen before, and so there was that tendency, as we see today more and more, building something up and then ripping it down, right? Trying to find the flaws, trying to chip away at the myth, and that takes a tremendous toll on the individual, obviously.
For sure. I mean, it's crazy how the basketball contract. That's the one to me that like I didn't not the Nike contract. Sorry, I didn't realize that he got it his first year. They gave him basically peanuts, and he's made billions of dollars off of it. Like it's fucking crazy.
Yeah, and it's funny that it wasn't peanuts at the time, right? It was actually, for them, it was considered an aggressive offer because they used to offer, like, the top guys would get like 100,000 and they offered him 250. So at the time it was huge, but Nike was an upstart and they saw an opportunity to build the company with it around him. And Converse apparently turned him down because they said, well, we're not going to put him at the same level as, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and those guys. And he preferred the Adidas brand. He wanted to go Adidas.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Adidas was like, they were a bit of a mess internally and they just couldn't pull the trigger on time. And so Nike swooped in, saw the opportunity, and like the rest is history.
So
that was. Think it was Run DMC and LL Cool J and all those guys that had him preferring Adidas? I mean, Adidas was the brand at that time, no?
Totally. Well, and Converse too, by the way. Converse was very urban, very streetwear. Nike was kind of unknown, I guess. It was like a track and field brand.
Yeah, that's what they were saying, and to me, it's crazy to think that Nike wasn't the biggest player, and Jordan put it on the map pretty much, and that's the most fun. Did you guys have any J's back then? I don't have a pair at all. I found like they're way too expensive. They're nice, but they're way too expensive. Fred, I feel like you would have a pair, one pair.
I got a bunch of pairs now, but when I was young, there's no way that would have been like a year's allowance or something. Like no way, couldn't afford them, but definitely. Watching on TV and just like that was like the object of desire,
I thought they did a good job of capturing that too, how everybody just, wanted a pair of MJ's Air Jordans just because they wanted to, feel like identify more strongly with him. Like everybody wanted to be like him. And I think that's both the, like you really see it. The documentary captures that so beautifully, especially in the behind the scenes footage where he comes out from inside a hotel where it's like quiet, and then all of a sudden the feeding frenzy everywhere he goes. But I thought that was it's kind of like the blessing, the curse of having a figure like that, because he's just an incredible human being. But then people trying to be like him and kind of emulate his way of being competitive, I think probably led to a lot of I don't know, undesirable behavior. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but something
Yeah.
like that. Everybody
It's a
trying to be
dangerous
like
path.
MJ.
Trying
A
to
lot
be great
arrogant.
like Mike. That's a tough slope to try to climb, right?
But the thing is
Yeah.
that if you look at it and based on from your article, Seth, is that he never tried to be like anybody else. He always tried to compete with everybody else, And that's the problem, is that everybody tries to be like somebody else. And LeBron never tried to be like Michael Jordan. He might have taken some traits here and there. Even Kobe said that. I love Fred's reaction. Even Kobe said, "I'm not."
Number 23. Number 23.
Yeah, I guess, but that's because you idolize somebody. It doesn't mean you're trying to be exactly like them, right? And they don't play the same style of play at all. I find, you know what I mean? And
True. Like Kobe would have been the guy that's like literally try to cut and paste Michael Jordan and become that, and did a pretty damn good job of it.
yeah, at least
He would be the guy that
intensity-wise.
got closest. Yeah.
At least when it comes to intensity.
I was fascinated to find in Roland Lazenby's biography of Jordan that Jordan chose the number 23 because his older brother's favorite number was 45. It wasn't available, so it was as close to half as he could get, And there's all these things that he said over the years. When you see me play, you see Larry play, And so I wonder if maybe he emulated his brother's game a little bit.
And his brother was a lot shorter. I think he ended up becoming taller than his brother. So probably his brother was probably roughing him around a lot because he was his older brother.
Yeah.
And that kind of forged the character, right?
Fred, only you have two brothers that are taller than you.
Sorry, yeah, exactly.
His brother was 5'8".
The younger brothers are both
5'8". Yeah, he grew to a maximum of 5'8".
Oh,
but you get all these coaches saying, "Look, if he grew to 6'6", then we would be talking about him instead of MJ right now."
I guess. I mean, we never know, right? It's easy to say to talk about hypotheticals, but it's I can't after watching this documentary, especially, I can't imagine somebody else being as dominant as MJ was back then. I mean, if in the argument LeBron versus MJ, I'm still a LeBron guy because, like I said before, it's my era. But I can't say that I've ever seen anybody play like MJ has. That's for sure.
It's like you said, Terry, it's so hard to compare eras, right? Because we can say, for example, LeBron went up against tougher competition, right? He had Tim Duncan Spurs. He had the Celtics with Kevin Garnett, like that team. He had the Warriors to deal with. So you can make that argument that he had to face sort of better competition. On the other hand, how do you measure greatness? If Jordan was like 20% not as dominant as he was, we'd be talking about the savage competition that he had to face and how competitive his era was. So it's so difficult to have proper markers. And the people who admit that themselves are the players. They say it is absolutely impossible. You should just admire everybody's greatness. Exactly. But I agree with you, Terry. It's hard for us growing up in the 90s, it's hard to even imagine a player. And we all wanted LeBron to get to that level. And we all kind of, like I'm still encouraging him. I hope he gets to 6-7 championships and gets past that standard. But, he's getting to the latter parts of his career, and it's not looking very likely that he's going to reach those levels. However, as you said at the beginning, he is going to be able to make a claim to being the greatest player ever. He's probably going to have better stats, like career stats, than Jordan. Yeah. He's already made more finals than Jordan, more complete player than Jordan. So at that point, we're starting to play the definitions game. It's like, how do you define greatness, right? And to me, it's, once you reach your peak, how high was your peak and for how long were you able to sustain it? And for that 8-year period, there was a sense when Michael Jordan played a game, if he did not want to lose that game, he was not going to lose that game. Whereas I feel like LeBron, there's a lot of games he didn't want to lose that he ended up losing.
That's very true.
And to me,
6-0 in the finals to me is like, it's a stat that you'll never be able to copy. We talk about Tom Brady. He still has 3 losses in the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? So, or 4, I think 4 losses in the Super Bowl. So it's tough to say that LeBron's been there 8 times, so he's better. But I wanted to ask you guys. You guys know a little bit more. From what I see, it looks like MJ's being defended by guys that look like me, not wearing an Indiana Pacers jersey. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that I'm kind of struggling with is what kind of defenses did MJ go against compared to LeBron or compared to Kobe? And that's like the last episode.
The hand check rule. The hand check rule is the big one, right?
Exactly.
So you were able to wrestle back then, like on the perimeter, and today you touch a guy with your hand, and that's a hand check foul. And so that's why you see so much penetration. That's why you also see so many opportunities for open threes because guys are driving and dishing. Whereas back then, you'd be carrying your defender all the way to the basket, and then you'd have to deal with a big man as well.
Well,
and so
it was more like an ISO ball kind of thing, right?
It was much more congested, much more physical.
But then also the absence of flagrant foul, a flagrant foul call. I mean, that was huge. They touched on that in the third or the fourth episode against the Pistons, the Bad Boys. There's a great 30 for 30 documentary about that called The Bad Boys.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to watch, and they cover this in The Last Dance too, how Jordan goes from being very skinny and lithe to all of a sudden cut and jacked, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that defense was just brutal. Same thing with the Knicks. And they talked about how similar the Knicks were to the Pistons, you know? And
guys would get expelled today. Guys would get expelled for playing that kind of defense today. Like they get suspended. They get suspended, you know, for like one of those Bill Laimbeer fouls would be an ejection today.
But to me, that's another fascinating thing. That series against the Pistons, I can't remember right offhand how many times the Bulls lost to the Pistons in the playoffs before they finally beat them. It was 2 or 3 years.
It was more. It was 3 or 4, I believe. It was definitely 3 for sure. 3. Yeah.
But to me, like having read his biography, it's fascinating the way that even there you see him coming up. Because my little theory, based on what I've read and watched, is that his father's sort of disapproval of him, combined with his shaming of him for not being like man enough to know which wrenches to use and so on, and also for being what his father regarded as a bit lazy because he only held one like part-time summer job. And his dad was a hard guy. Some of his brothers talk about that in episode 2, I think, you know? And so the constant shaming plus the unfavorable comparisons with his older brother, that's what really kind of created this predatory win at all costs mentality. And there he comes up against some bullying kind of older brother like characters in the Detroit Pistons, the Bad Boys, you know? Yeah. And then same thing with the Knicks. And so, yeah, that was fascinating to watch.
You know, like here's like one of the clinchers for MJ's greatness is that you're absolutely right. He had that like I'm gonna punch the bully in the nose mentality. But you know, early on in his career, he was consistently getting beat down by the bully. Yet still remained a team player, still remained super classy in defeat, you know, shaking everybody's hands. You see the interviews right after his losses, very, very cool-headed. Of course, then you know the story of the psychotic summer workouts that came after that.
Yeah.
So he turned that inwards, but he always had sort of like a grander sense of fair play and of respect your opponent and of, you know, I've got to get better.
At least so we're led to believe by the documentary, and I buy it. I totally buy it. And he does come across as unbelievably, you know, I find charismatic and charming, and the dude really had it all. And, you know, I bet there was some much more unsavory aspects of his character that we only get. Like, he came across publicly as a great sportsman, but, you know, it burned him up every time he lost. And that, you know, like I liked it when they talked about the Jordan rules, and then they, you know, he pinned it on Horace, but then BJ Armstrong was like, look, it couldn't have just been Horace Grant who dished about all the stuff that was going on in the locker room. Maybe it was the coaches, maybe it was the organization. Like a lot of guys, he did come across as, in his own words, a bit of a tyrant, you know?
Well, I mean,
totally. And a bully himself. He had come up against bullies so much early on in his life.
He wasn't playing the nice guy. He wasn't playing the nice guy game. Jordan was not playing the I'm trying to be a nice guy game. He wasn't trying to be like the ordinary man. Jordan was playing the I'm the alpha warrior card. Like I'm the hero card, right? And it's a different psychology altogether, right?
Well, he knew that the team
guys that everybody loves, that not controversial, and just never even got close to like a level of greatness or even like the maximizing their own potential.
Well, he knew the team would have to.
Price to him.
He knew the team would have to follow him. That like they have been following him. So he's like, we've had success because we've been able to do this. We're gonna keep on doing this, and you guys follow me. And if you're not up to snuff, then you're gone. Pretty much. Like I'm not gonna fuck around. Yeah, exactly. He's setting the standard.
And you know, I loved Seth's article. Was really fantastic. It was like I almost look at it as like, you know, really looking at the dark side of greatness or the price of greatness, and is it all worth it? Right? That question. You kind of see it also in figures like Steve Jobs, right? The guy who built Apple, and like really was just like a crappy boss and like really just kind of bullying all of his employees and not having much of a relationship with his daughter. And you see that sort of the dark side of that singular quest for excellence and domination. And the question is always like, is it really worth it in the end, right?
Yeah.
And there's always like, it really depends for who, right? For the individual themselves, I mean, clearly they are okay sacrificing their own well-being in order to pursue greatness. So for them, it's like, maybe not. Maybe there's some moments in their lives where they really live through a lot of darkness, but to them, that's the price of greatness. They accept to pay it, right? For their teammates, it depends. If you get chewed out, obviously it's not worth it. But for the teammates that do buy into the culture, they can be elevated to a level of achievement that they would have never been able to get on their own. If you look at the fans and the users, yeah, for sure it's worth it. I get to tune in. I mean, I get this great hero to look at. If I want to throw some rocks at him, I can throw some rocks at him as well. So, I mean, for us, it's all positives, right?
Yeah.
And then for the world in general, it's like, what's the value of having somebody set the standard at such a high level? Like, how many millions of kids has Michael Jordan motivated to just push themselves a little bit harder, to be a little bit more disciplined, to be a little bit more focused? And so there's so many different perspectives how you look at it, but it's definitely a conversation. There's definitely a dark side to the greatness.
And that side of it I really appreciate, but then, you know, that he does motivate you. Like, I mean, how can you watch The Last Dance and not want to go shoot some hoops, right? Like, he really does motivate for sure.
We're all making a
On
comeback.
the other hand, what's that? But if you regard him as a hero, which now he's saying he wish he didn't play that game because I think he said it stacked against me. There is the shadow side to it too, because he's like they call him the alpha male, right? Mm-hmm. And there can only be one alpha male.
There can only be one alpha male.
One alpha male in this case is a trash talking, hyper competitive, ultra masculine dude who takes no prisoners, and he's a cold-blooded predator. And if you get like a whole culture of people emulating that ideal of greatness, in a way you get a bunch of jerks who are really like cold and like a little bit cruel and cutthroat and all that. I was lucky enough to play basketball against Steve Nash in high school. I played with him and against him.
Oh, nice.
And my mom was at one of my games. After one of the games, she came up to him and she asked him, how is it that you can be such a great basketball player and be such a gentleman on the court? And his answer was, I only ever play against myself. And it's a totally different model of motivation. Jordan's whole model is, in my view anyway, I'm going to kind of overcompensate. I'm going to dominate others to prove my worth. In Nash's model, if this was like a consistent model for him, I'm going to beat my own personal best. I'm going to compete against myself and remain like a gentleman on the court. There's probably
who was the greater competitor? Who was the greater competitor between Steve Nash and Michael Jordan, though?
If Nash was 6'6", I wonder, you know?
Well,
Nash was fantastic.
He was amazing.
But what if we go to Gretzky or you know, like Ali or Brady? Like, I mean, he doesn't seem to have a chip on his shoulder. Jordan has a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, but again, the question is, these are all great competitors. Who is the greatest competitor of them all? And I'm just looking at the competition, right? I'm not asking the question of the broader ramifications. I'm not asking like, you know, who's the better teammate? I'm not asking who's the better person, who's the better father, we know Jordan went through divorces, and like there's all kinds of sort of private dramas, but I'm talking about as strictly as a competitor. And so I wonder whether, and you know, I think I can make the case that Michael Jordan is the greatest competitor of them all, not necessarily the better person. And nonetheless, I think the question is the question that you pose. I look at it both ways. One way is that level of greatness worth it? The other way is the problem that Jordan brought himself to that state, or the fact that he couldn't bring himself in and out of that state? And is that even possible? Like, once you reach that psychotic level of, man, the guy was betting for money with like the arena staff that were making barely any money, okay? And he's like betting money with them for everything. The question is, once you reach that psychotic state, is it even possible to switch it on and off? Is it even possible to go from warrior mode to being like, you know, good friend mode? Is it even possible? Or is it just too much cognitive dissonance, right? And so maybe he is the greatest competitor ever, but does that still make it a model that we want to emulate? However, if you're in the foxhole and you've got war coming and you've got a battle, who do you want by your side? Tom Brady or Michael Jordan?
Yeah, no question, no question.
It's tough. It's tough to say. And I back to your point, Seth, is that I do think Tom Brady has a chip on his shoulder. I just don't think I don't think he shows it as much as MJ did. You know what I mean? Tom Brady's chip on his shoulder is behind the scenes. If you're a huge Patriots fan or if you're a huge football fan, you know, and you follow Tom Brady, you'll see what he does in the offseason and all the things that he does and how he prepares throughout the week. It's just that he's not playing 82 games in the season, so you only get a small sample size of it, right? So that's why I'll compare. If I had to compare greatness, I'm always going to compare MJ and Tom Brady only because of their work ethic. Tom Brady took a year off. He tore his ACL. What he did was he fixed every other part of his body, and after that he won 3 Super Bowls. So for him, there's different ways of going about it. And again, quarterback I think is probably the toughest position in sports, just to be a quarterback. There's so many small segments in a game that you have to control. You only get 16 chances a year. You don't get 82 plus the playoffs, and it's a little tougher to compare those two, but I will compare them in that they're both competition greatness, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I find it's fascinating because Jordan is I really do think the guy had almost everything. He was a physical specimen. He had great genes. He had this extraordinary drive. He had style, swagger. He had charisma. He had looks. So if he was even more complete as a human being, maybe he would also have a greater sense of community feeling, or you know what I mean? But it almost sounds, I don't know. I hear you, Fred, when you say that. Perhaps the greatest competitor of all time. And when you're going to that well, day in, day out, year in, year out, can you switch it off? Maybe not. Maybe not. But then he's got to pay the piper for that.
Maybe you pass a threshold, right? Where you'd have to go to like great warriors of like the past where they just, something went off in their brain. And, you know, like MJ was known as like inventing or magnifying like disrespects to him, right? So he would relive those moments over and over because he felt he used it as fuel to kind of push himself to that place. It's almost like everything was sacrificed in it's truly like a single-minded pursuit of greatness. And there's a tremendous psychological cost to that if you do that, but there's a tremendous competitive gain as well, right? So it's like almost like a trade-off.
And I feel like that tremendous psychological cost is visible in him, like not to take anything away from him, but he looks like, to me, sad-eyed.
Down.
He looks weary. Yeah, he looks worn out. He's let himself get really out of shape and all that kind of stuff. And I can't help but wonder if it's not a consequence of this hyper-competitiveness that we see there early on, you know. He wants to, you know, go to the max in every single little competition, and it's got to be wearing, it's got to be draining, and constantly trying to prove your own worth, you know, again and again and again. You know, it's got to be exhausting.
You know what I really saw it said for the first time? I really saw it in the Hall of Fame speech.
Yeah.
Where here he is, like everybody's just admiring him. He's on the pedestal. Michael Jordan, greatest player of all time. Nobody's really contesting it. Like nobody really important. Isaiah Thomas said he's the 4th best player ever played against, but they pulled up a bunch of quotes. Yeah, but that's just recently. Yeah. They pulled up a bunch of quotes from Isaiah Thomas from the past where he said Michael Jordan's the best player of all time.
Yeah.
So there was no real debate. He's there. And instead of being kind of magnanimous and thankful and grateful, he brings up one after another all of the slights, all the disrespect. He looks at Jerry Krause, and it's funny because I saw on social media, they replayed that clip where he talks about Jerry Krause during his Hall of Fame induction speech where, you know, everybody thought it was a joke, but you see it now in light of The Last Dance, and you realize it wasn't a joke where he goes, I don't know what Jerry Krause is doing here. I didn't invite him. He said that organizations when he goes, I didn't see organizations play on a sprained ankle. And he was not joking. Like you can tell the dude is truly still bitter about these things. His heart is not filled with gratitude and I'm sure he does deep inside, but like he's still living out those demons.
Well, he's constantly looking for that approval, right?
Yeah.
Always looking for the approval.
25 years later too.
Yeah.
Mind you, it's a crucible. Like, I have a couple friends who played pro sports, and I mean, it is a crucible. You're in that. I remember by the time I finished university sports, I was like, get me out of here. It's just too much. It's too constant. You know, I'm looking forward to having my freedom. I can't imagine what it's like to play the chimpanzee politics, not only of a team sport, but then with the organizations and then all of everything that was going on. It must be very challenging.
Some guys, when they retire, they put all their effort and their competitive spirit into business. You know, like Roger Staubach is like a multimillionaire after football. You know what I mean? So there's plenty of ways to do it, and MJ's still doing that. I mean, I don't really know how much work he's actually doing for Nike other than just his name on the shoe, but he's still making billions off of those shoes. And from what I hear, he's still on the golf course every day, chuffing stogies and making $20,000 hole bets, you know. So he's trying to find that way, but it might be if he hasn't, I don't know, some sort of therapy or something to just calm it down. I don't think it's going to end well for the guy. He might die of a heart attack just from the stress of not being able to compete. You know, I mean, I'm just
he's carrying a lot of pain and a lot of negative emotions. But there's almost like there's the case of Michael Jordan in particular, like his particular issues, where you can kind of see it that, you know, he needs to take the edge off a little bit and just enjoy life and appreciate and just kind of like realize that it was all just, you know, a chapter in his life, a phase in his life. But my God, can any of us really put ourselves in those shoes of living through that phase and really doing it with mostly a lot of grace and a lot of foresight? And I mean, there's no preparation for MJ's life. You know what I mean? Like, just an individual who went through that. He wasn't even the number one pick in his draft class. He was not. You know, LeBron James was sort of ordained for greatness way earlier than Michael Jordan was. And
I still remember the article clipping. I was in high school, I was in my senior year of high school, and I remember the article clipping of LeBron James signing his Nike contract, 9 years, $70 million. I'll never forget that headline. And I'm thinking, this guy's 18. He just signed for $90 million for 7 years. And he hasn't even played a game in the NBA yet. It was right before the season hadn't even started yet. And LeBron never had that, right? So I'm sorry, MJ never had that. LeBron had it right away. Everything was pretty much given to him. Hey, run with it. Where MJ had to go take it and then run with it. And that's the difference. And that's what most athletes are like MJ, but he's the only one that's able to take it and become who he has been today.
Yeah. So there's like the individual level, and then there's the social argument. And Seth, this is where I find your article is so good, is that it raises all these questions. So it's like, for the individual, right? I guess it depends what your values are. If your values are sort of monetary and materialistic, it's like, I mean, he's went through all that pain and suffering, but the guy's a billionaire, so, you know, all good, right? But if you look at it from a psychological well-being perspective, obviously there's some skeletons in that closet, and there's some issues that he's got to work out. But once you blow it up to the social sort of dimension, you're like, MJ as a model, MJ as a myth, MJ as an aspiration for people. Is it a positive one or a negative one? And it's such a tough question to answer, because some people are going to cross a lot of ethical boundaries to try to get to that level, and they're going to fail. Some of them are going to cause a lot of damage along the way. But then some minority of people are going to be able to sort of escalate the echelon of greatness and get to the top of the mountain and make outstanding contributions to society as a whole that, again, from their individual perspective, maybe came at a big cost, but for society as a whole, has utility. Because, you know, not everybody can achieve, you know, a Steve Jobs level. Not everybody can achieve a Michael Jordan. And when they do reach those pinnacles, you know, they're not ordinary men. They're not non-controversial people that everybody likes, but they do contribute something in terms of an example for whatever, a bunch of values: focus, discipline, perseverance, overcoming adversity. And also, you know, they give us gifts that we can sort of enjoy and appreciate, you know, at very low risk. So I feel like it's almost impossible to answer that question, because it is sort of a grand moral dilemma. You know, is the price of greatness worth it or not? It's just so many different ways of looking at it.
It's so true. And I guess one other way you could look at it too is that, I mean, on the one hand, he seems to be like an example of somebody who reached the absolute pinnacle or apex and is still seemingly, it's hard to make assumptions, but seems pretty unfulfilled somehow.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what's up with his eyes, if it's just all the cigars or it's liver stuff or jaundice or what, but, you know, he doesn't look clear, let's say.
I mean, it maybe his competitive spirit knew that this was going to happen, and that's why he recorded. He for some reason decided to release this 20 years later. You know what I mean? That's the part that I'm questioning. Like he recorded this all in 1998. Why wait 22? Why wait 20 years to put it out? I mean, maybe
they were waiting for a global pandemic, Terry, where they know we'd all be like stuck at the screen and looking at it.
But I'm happy they waited.
It's fascinating too, because I mean, here we are in the midst of a pandemic. There's no sports. Everybody's looking for heroes. Politicians' approval ratings are through the roof across the board, more or less. So if there's going to be any time when we're most likely to deify a human being and idealize them, it's now. And so there is, I think, it's interesting because I read that they're basically editing each episode as almost in vivo, like the 4, 5, and 6 now are complete, but they're working on 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Really?
Oh,
wow.
okay.
And so in this process, I can't help but wonder if they're going to paint an even more flattering portrait of him because people need and want a hero right now,
I mean, I guess that's a good point, Seth. I like that, and he was always looking for that, right? He always wanted to be, even though he didn't really care what his perception was, he cared about what people thought about him, right? He didn't care what people thought. He just wanted to be known as the best at all times, and I think that's what's coming out in this documentary. And it's perfect timing, like you said. Nobody has anything else to do right now. How many arguments have Fred and I had based on who's better, LeBron or this person? You know what I mean? And the fact that he put this out now, so many of those LeBron guys are going to be switching to the MJ guys. Yeah. And it's almost like he did it on purpose. Like, okay, LeBron, I respect you. You're a great player, but I'm going to show everybody how I really was. And all of your era is fucked because I'm going to show them how good I was and how dominant I was, much better than you were. So I'm going to take 20% of your fan base and bring it over to my side.
And so in a way, it's another great example of his ruthless competitive spirit because he's got a captive audience and he picked like just the perfect spot to overcome LeBron if he hadn't already,
I'm a LeBron guy, and I've been kind of like kind of creeping watching this. I'm like, fuck, I didn't know. Like, I look at the numbers. Like, all you can base yourself on is the numbers, right? So if I'm gonna do the comparison, I'm gonna look at LeBron and say, you know what? I think that he's a better all-around player. He never won a Defensive Player of the Year like MJ did, though. But in the year, I wanted to bring it back to the point is who did he play against? Like, name me 5 really good defensive players that MJ played against.
MJ?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's not an argument you want to have.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I don't know.
MJ played against defensive beasts. I mean, that whole Detroit Pistons team was top to bottom one of the best defensive teams ever.
That's the thing is I don't know. That's why I can't make that argument.
I mean, generally speaking, back then the game was a lot more, like I said, a lot more clustered, a lot more big man focused, a lot more defensive, a lot more physical. So even at equal talent, but coaches also coached defense a lot more back then than they do today. I mean, today it's all about offense. It's all about the 3-point shot. It's all about analytics. Back then, the culture was very, very much oriented around defense. I mean, even a team like Magic's Lakers put a premium on defense. We're one of the strongest defensive teams. So it's MJ they both dealt with great defenses. I think in that one particular argument, I think LeBron played against more dynamic offensive teams with more multiple all-stars, probably offensive superstars than MJ did. But MJ dealt with defense. I mean, you saw some of those. You saw that conference final against the Knicks where he was going up against, I mean, just a bunch of top-of-the-line defenders. You had Anthony Mason in there. You had Charles Oakley. You had Patrick Ewing. You had
John Starks.
One guy after another. Yeah, it was, and they were all geared towards stopping the one, MJ.
And that's why Paxson was open at the end for the game-winning shot, right?
That's right.
How understated is Paxson, eh?
Yeah.
He's so modest. Yeah. He's so, dude, he won the game-winning shot in such a clutch way, and he's like, and that was very fulfilling for me personally.
But it looked like he was kind of tearing up,
He's the only guy that survived. He was part of both championship reigns, right?
Exactly,
he was like the old Bulls and the new Bulls. Like, you see him throughout. Him and Kerr, I think, were like the only two.
Well, the thing is that when we talk about those Bulls and everybody's like, who did he play with? Everybody throws their names out, but kind of like in passing. Oh, Kerr, Paxson, Kukoc. but these guys were like legit players for their own right. I mean, they would be maybe not as successful, but in other teams they would be just as good. Or individually.
Yeah, they're good players. It's just MJ never really had, with the exception of perhaps Dennis Rodman, but even then he was towards the end of his career, never had that third all-star, that bona fide third all-star that LeBron had in Chris Bosh, in Kevin Love, right?
But Kevin Love at that point, I mean, it was towards the end of his. He kind of started tapering down, right?
He was still selected as an all-star, right? Whereas MJ never really had that third bona fide star with him.
So that's another argument that I wanted to bring up with you guys is that we always compare. We can't compare eras, but we compare teams, right? So like we compare the Bulls, Pippen, Rodman, and MJ versus, let's say, the Miami Three, and who is better and who would win, and it's two different styles of play. But do you think that Rodman's gonna let LeBron come in as easily as he has been now?
Pippen.
He's
the greatest defender in the league.
Yeah, is Pippen gonna let Chris Bosh take a three from late in the fourth quarter? You know what I mean? I don't think it's gonna happen. It's very tough to argue, but it's an interesting conversation. It's good arguments.
Yeah, that's a great question, man. 3-on-3 between those guys, and I want to say, like, I don't know. That's a tricky one, but ultimately, and this kind of just comes back to the MJ versus LeBron question, you know, to me, one of the aces in the hole that Jordan had is just the poise. You know, you see LeBron get rattled, but Jordan is so unbelievably clutch and loose and bouncy in a way that, like, I would say LeBron doesn't have that same.
Great article, Seth. I loved it.
It was amazing.
And it's a great discussion. I'm really enjoying this, guys. Terry, you make some great points. Obviously, Fred, too.
Hot sauce sports, baby.
Yeah.
This is where you get burned. I still want to be like Mike, Seth. There's nothing you can say.
I know, but what about Mike at 57? You don't want that.
I don't want to be Mike at 57. You're right.
I'd prefer to be Fred at 57 than Mike at 57.
You know what? It's been etched in me too deeply, man. Those commercials, that Be Like Mike commercial, for fuck's sakes, man. When I saw it again, I had tears in my eyes. I'm like, oh my God. I realized Be Like Mike, that's like a mantra for me. That was like so deeply etched, man. I can't get rid of it. It's like brainwashing.
Yeah. I think that's the take back that he has, though. If he could take anything back, it would be the Be Like Mike thing, because he got kind of fossilized or trapped in this ideal expectation that he clearly, like, he had a dark side like every other human being, but probably particularly hyper-competitive human beings. I don't know if you guys, one of your buddies on Facebook mentioned Tim Grover's Relentless.
Yeah.
And he has a chapter on that, you know, like basically owning your dark side, channeling your dark side, not needing to be liked by others and stuff like that. And I appreciate that. Like, I totally understand that. And then outside of the sport of basketball, it makes for unpleasant human beings. I've definitely played against a bunch of dudes in basketball and rugby, but especially basketball, who had that kind of vibe, that were awesome basketball players and assholes.
Totally.
You know, there's a lot of dicks in basketball.
Like I love that business, Seth. You know, in the business world, you have a hyper-competitive guys who are fantastic, who are making a lot of money, and who are jerks and have like their personal life in tatters, and like nobody wants to be friends with them, and you know they have just terrible relationships with their kids, and so on and so forth. Right? You see that dichotomy all the time.
So I recorded all that, so that was good. So, but back to your point that we got before we got cut off, Fred, is you were talking about, I forgot what you were talking about, but it was a good point.
Taking the burden in the big tricky moments.
Yeah.
Something that LeBron got better at, by the way, later in his career.
Yeah.
Starting with the Heat era, that second year, he really started to embrace the moment a lot better. It took him a while to get to that point. But even then, it wasn't as flawless, as automatic, as complete as like the way Jordan would step into that moment.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I feel like that's a place where, particularly the sport of basketball, and it's interesting to watch the rise of basketball as an international athletic and cultural phenomenon. And I can't help but wonder if it also serves an ideological function. Like, Jordan was so closely associated with Coke and McDonald's and all these things and he was such a great kind of seemingly rags to riches story that it fed into this kind of story of social mobility, where anybody can kind of rise from nothing to greatness. Everybody can be like Mike. It really I feel like maybe serves an ideological function to promote that American sort of dream mentality in a way that other sports don't, because despite the fact that basketball is such a team sport, it's also arguably the most individualistic of the team sports. You're never going to see Jordan in hockey in a way, and if you do, he's just not going to be as dominant. Same in football. They're more team sports than basketball.
I'm actually happy you said that, Seth, because that's an argument that I make all the time, is that you take the individual in basketball over any other sport. Like, we could talk about Tom Brady, we mentioned him before, but realistically, he doesn't work if his offensive line doesn't block for him, where MJ can individually take over a game. You know what I mean? In basketball, you're able to do that.
But going back to your point about rags to riches, so social mobility obviously is going to be always a very powerful image in the American psyche, because it is a society where social mobility is possible. And so those and of course, not possible for everyone. And so, a minority probably succeed at it and are held up as the model. And the question is the system as a whole kind of geared towards that? And to the extent that it is, it's a fair system. To the extent that it's not a fair system. In case of Jordan, I find, and we had this discussion, Seth, I find one element that's kind of swept under the rug that we don't kind of discuss is, we're used to the African-American athlete coming from a very, very poor, discombobulated family life, ghetto life, and then becoming a superstar. We're used to that trajectory. We don't nearly talk enough about the success of the black middle class in America. And that's something that does exist. And you look at Jordan's parents, they stuck together. They were hardworking individuals. They instilled a lot of sort of classic middle class values to their kids: hard work, being polite, working hard, persevering, and so forth. And you see when Jordan comes into the NBA, he's not the guy that gets into the sort of the fame and drugs and chicks culture of the NBA. He's working hard. He's polite. He's like very sort of hemmed in. And that's like, to me, Jordan, it shouldn't be looked at so much as a rags to riches story than as a middle class to success story. And that's a story you don't hear that much. And it's almost like the black middle class doesn't exist in America. It's like, no, it's either the ghetto or these superstars. And it's not true. A lot of people have been able in the African American community to penetrate the middle class and then offer a springboard, a foundation for their kids to sort of build on that. And you kind of see the tension between Jordan and his dad also from that perspective. His dad was trying to teach Larry, good conservative middle class values, like go for the base hit, not for the home run, right? Or like know your way around a car. And Jordan just had something else in him, right? He wanted to go big. He wanted to go for that big success. And that was also part of the tension between him and his dad.
Yeah. And that kind of ideally, even moving from the middle class, you make a lot of great points there about the relative dearth of middle class athletes or black athletes from middle class backgrounds. But even there, like, most people didn't know that about Jordan initially, I want to say. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But even there, the move from the middle class to the upper class, the power of one, the rugged individualism, the heroism of the competitive individualist. In the early 90s, even the late 80s, that was a particularly important trope on the global stage with the fall of communism, the Berlin Wall, and all that kind of stuff. And so I can see how he, in addition to everything else, was in a way lucky. And the fact that he did come from a middle-class background also meant that unlike guys like Ali, unlike guys like Lou Alcindor, Kareem, he had really, and he admits it himself, no interest in any kind of activism. Or, and that to me is a...
Republicans buy sneakers too.
What's that? Yeah, exactly.
Republicans buy sneakers too, man. He got lynched for that. But he's like, hey, man.
And maybe this is unfair because he is so exceptional in so many ways. So could he have been a nicer human being to his teammates and others? I think so. could he also have been more magnanimous, more large-hearted, more caring of others? Does he come across as a bit selfish to me and only interested in his own financial prowess? To me, very much so. And I think that is another small knock you can make against this great man. Like, it would have been even more unbelievable if, in addition to everything else,
aren't we holding up an impossible standard? Aren't we holding up an impossible standard for a human being? We want them to be competitive. We want them to beat everybody else, and we want them to be Mother Teresa and be a nice guy, and we want them to be a social activist. And it's like, at some point, like, let's realize these people are human beings. They're limited. They're flawed. They've got their dark sides like everybody else. And you know, some of them touch greatness and they give that gift to us, and let's appreciate it. But you know, then we start getting into these sort of like, you know, throwing arrows at greatness mode, which is like, you know, building up an idol and then just to rip it back down, right? And there's a humanity in Jordan. There's a sense also where he's fully aware of the price that he paid, where he understands that he's in a darker place than he really should be because of his psychology. He gets it, and even in his late 50s, he still hasn't worked it out. But there's a humanity in Jordan also that I find is something that he's not unaware of all these things, and he's just a limited human being. And for fuck's sakes, man, he was the greatest basketball player of all time.
Well, there's characteristics that you need to meet in order to be a great person, and we can talk about being a philanthropist and you know, and supporting a political party because the other one doesn't support with what you look like or what you've been raised as. And he didn't want to fall into that too much, where most athletes do, because nowadays that's what's important. Back then, it wasn't. In the 90s, it wasn't really that important. I mean, there was that racial tension for sure, like you mentioned, Seth, but it wasn't for him. He was like, I just want to win. And back to the point where his teammates may not have liked him or not, I'm sure Horace Grant is not crying that he has 3 freaking NBA championship rings. You know what I mean? So
yeah, but I think some of those qualities also made Jordan the ultimate consumer commodity.
Yeah,
I mean, he was an unapologetic capitalist with absolutely no kind of distance from that ideal. I honestly think, and I say this with tongue in cheek, but I honestly think that he almost would have worn underwear on his head if it could have made him another $1 million bucks. You know, he was unapologetic in that way, and so he did become like a real symbol of consumer capitalism.
But Seth, you made a great point about the political moment of the times. I had never thought of that you know, the Jordan era essentially came towards the end of the Cold War, right? Late 80s, early 90s. And so the dominant political and cultural idea at the time was the victory of capitalism. And so there was this kind of victorious, there was a dot-com boom. There was, you know, the decline of communism all around the world. And there was a sense in which America was victorious. And so Jordan symbolizes this kind of victorious spirit of capitalism. Whereas when you look today we've shifted. If you look at the dominant sort of political, cultural, one of the most important lenses through which we look at politics today is you see it in, you know, social justice warriors, and you see it in sort of like the tribalism and the identity politics. And you kind of see a reemergence of like that consciousness of race, and we're different, and there are the privileged and the underprivileged. And so that becomes much more important when when LeBron supports Colin Kaepernick. You know, that becomes something that's a lot more that resonates a lot more. But back then, you know, it was really, the mode was victorious capitalism, dot-com boom, the rise of NASDAQ, the fall of capitalism. And Jordan really kind of stepped in there and became corporate America's ultimate image, right? Victory at all costs. We won, right?
It's good.
Unlike, let's say, Ali, who we see him interact with briefly there, unlike Kareem, unlike many other people who, I don't know what their class, I mean, Ali for sure came from a lower class background. What about Kareem? I'm not sure about that, but.
Well, they were closer to the 60s, right? They were closer to the 60s, 70s, so the civil rights era. And so they had a very strong sort of racial consciousness, right, of those struggles and the battle for equal rights. Whereas Jordan, I think, kind of like took it for granted. You know, he grew up in the middle class. To him, you know, America was more even keel. You know, that like those tensions were not forefront in his consciousness.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Good stuff. Good stuff, guys. I mean, I don't think we've settled any debate here. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to be settled, other than the fact that we know that Jordan is probably the best competitor of all time. Second to none, I would say. But you know what? If you have an argument, send it over to Fred, Seth, and myself, and we'll see if I'm sure Fred will probably beat you in any argument you can have, no matter what he's arguing about. And I want to say this, Fred.
I'm just taking the easy argument. I'm taking the easy one, which is MJ's a great competitor. That's just like that's the softball.
I will say this though. You mentioned before. I don't know if it was Seth or Fred who mentioned it, but you were talking about how on the court he's shit talking and he's shooting threes and he's getting in your face and he's not letting you breathe and you can't think. And that only reminds me of one person. That's Fred Pinto playing ball hockey. That's for sure. Fred Pinto on the playing ball hockey is extremely intense.
That's because you've never played basketball against me, Barry.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm waiting for that. I mean, I'll bring my Pacers, my Indiana Pacers jersey.
I grew up. That "Be Like Mike" commercial was like brainwashed him. I was telling Seth, it was to me that was like drilled deep down in my psyche of like Michael Jordan was the image of greatness.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's funny because just in my personal life, I also felt some of that. Whoa, I've got to take the edge off a little bit. I was getting too competitive, too aggressive, and I started seeing like in your personal life and the way that you relate to people, you've got to chill out sometimes, and you've got to just let other people breathe.
And maybe it's no coincidence that we're Jordan era human beings, Fred. Maybe that played into our personae on the court, on the ice.
Absolutely, 100%.
The swagger, the braggadocio, the omnipotence, that's what everybody was aspiring for. And I think that's one of the less desirable aspects of MJ's game in a way. I love him doing that, but then when everybody's trying to do that, it's like, ooh, I don't feel this is working for me.
Dude, chill out. You're not Jordan. It's cool when Jordan does it.
It's disingenuous, and it's not. You can tell when somebody's faking it, right? Fake it till you make it. I don't believe in that at all. You can tell when someone's faking it. And sometimes I get that feeling from some of these guys nowadays, and it's
absolutely.
And
there's also a more egalitarian ethic today where guys are just like kind of like more spread the wealth, and guys are not necessarily going for greatness today. They're going for big contracts. System. Yeah, they're going for contracts. They're going for money. They're okay not being the greatest. They're okay. They're egalitarian, but I would argue they're just as selfish. They're just looking at the money component to it. They're looking at the fame component to it.
Was there a salary cap back then?
There's an honor that comes with the competitive level of Michael Jordan. There's an honesty to the craft that comes with it as well that I find a lot of these players today don't have. Here we go, old school, new school debate. We can have that one too.
Thanks for coming on, guys. Seth, the article is amazing. I'm going to share it on our page as well. Fred, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it, guys. And next time, at the end of all this, we'll do a recap of the entire series.
Sweet. Thanks a lot, Terry, for having us. And it was a slice, man. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks a lot, guys. Talk soon.
All right. Take it easy.